Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Introduce, we are from Group 6 of Class A will present the summary of our book. With me, Muhammad Lutfi Hasani, NIM 2021 0110 218.
Me, Himati Pramestiyani 2021 011191
I'm Rifqi Damar Panuluh with name 2021 0110 224. As the title implies, this novel takes the main setting of the cities London and Paris in the 17th century. The city of London at the time was still gripping because of robbery and specter of terrible punishments given to people who were considered guilty, even if only minor mistakes. Meanwhile, the social inequality and arbitrariness of the Parisian nobility to the poor really cut the heart. It is said that at the time, the nobility of Paris held a party every 2 weeks in the midst of a famine that took the souls of their people. The aristocrats wore luxurious clothes with dazzling jewels, while their subjects were emaciated and tattered. At the time, nobles didn't work, but they were still rich and lived in luxury because they had large lands that were rented out to the residents, and because the nobles were like leaders in their respective areas. There is one scene that is very heartbreaking, namely when the Marquis carriage, as the Parisian nobles were called at the time, drove very fast and hit a small child to death. The Marquis just tossed a coin indifferently, just as if he was disturbed, because his trip was interrupted.
It is told that a doctor named Alexander Manet was thrown into the Bastille prison for 18 years by a nobleman without being tried first. That day's impression deeply turned the doctor's heart because it took away his common sense. When his illness records, he will start making suspicious he thinks he is a cobbler. He couldn't if reasons other people, but finally his daughter, Lucy managed to find herself thanks to help of bank employees. Mr. Lois and the host of a former waiter named Mr. Devereux owns a wine tavern in Paris. Lucy took her father back to London, and on the way she met Carlos Darnay, and they fall in love with each other. Carlos is a handsome young man who works as a French teacher at Cambridge University. One time Carlos Darnay stumbled upon a case that caused him to be nearly exhausted. But fortunately Sydney Corton's lawyer managed to free him. Surprisingly, the two of them looked similar. If only Corton had spotted up his appearance more. Sydney was actually a brave young man, but extraordinarily indifferent and always in misery. His life was disorganized and became a severe alcoholic. Sydney is indifferent to everything including herself, but she is very cold about Lucy.
On Carlos and Lucy's wedding days, Dr. Manity learns the real name and who Carlos Darnay really is, but Dr. Manity persuades him to not tell anyone, especially Lucy. Dr. Manity was so shaken after learning who Carlos really was, that his illness followed, but Mr. Lorry and Miss Ross Lucinini thought Dr. Manet's illness had relapsed because she had to be away from Lucy. But Dr. Manet managed to recover, and she lived happily every Sunday. Who had expressed his love for Lucy before Lucy was married, was happy for the couple and continued to visit their house. The storm in their lives began to come when the French Revolution occurred and Carlos, who turned out to be a French nobleman, felt he had to return to his country because of a guerrilla and to save his captured segment. Carlos Denny is not his real name. His real name is Carlos Mundo. Uh, he threw away his noble title along with his position in Paris because he was fed up with the noble way of life that was in the midst of society, misery, and cruelty oppressed them. Uh, he fled to London and supported himself by teaching French, but after the French Revolution took place, he realized he made a mistake. He left his responsibility as Marquis and caused to live life happily in London. He has lived various problems as a nobleman to his servant and caused a simple life in London. So when society dragged his servant to prison because misunderstanding, Darnay felt very guilty and wanted to be responsible.
Charles went secretly to Paris, hoping to explain the truth and calm the anger of the people so that he could free his servant from prison. But he was wrong, because the fire of anger has ignited all over the country that brought the nobles and all those suspected to be under la guillotine, the device for beheading at the time, which was very legendary. Lucy and her father, having learned that Charles was going to Paris, soon followed, and thanks to the influence of Dr. Manet, who is highly respected because of his 18 years of experience as a prisoner in the Bastille, Charles Darnay also won his trial. However, who would have thought a letter taken from one of the Bastille prison rooms had incriminated him so that he went back into prison. This time, Dr. Manet could no longer help him because the letter was written by himself while still imprisoned in the Bastille. What is the content of the letter? What is his relationship with Madame Javert? And how can a letter make Charles a defendant? When hope is almost extinguished, there comes a period of hope who slices the heart and at the same time carves a smile.
Strange. It is not surprising that this novel became the best-selling novel in history. The setting of the story is very interesting, namely in the 16th century in London and Paris, where the situation is very much different from today. Very scary and thrilling, not to mention that every character presented has a very unique character or a unique job that adds to the excitement of the story. For example, the unusual job of Mr. Jerry, who is a corset Sydney Carton, who is genius but without any hope of life, or Mr. Lorry, who is very loyal to the bank where he works. The snippet of even that at first seemingly confusing become very interesting when the red curtain began to be shown, because every incident that was entirely unimportant and only sideways turned out to be an important key in the end. Besides being interesting, of course, there are many important lessons that can be taken from this novel. For example, the language is full of quality state, From a historical point of view, we get an overview of life before and during the French Revolution so that influence of knowledge. In addition, what is more important is that we can take lessons both from the story and from the setting the character displayed.
Weakness from this book when I read translate book. So for me the language is a bit difficult to understand. Maybe because this is a translation of a classic work, so the translation is not easy to understand as ordinary novels. I recommended this book because it's one of the best-selling book of times. This book takes the background of the 17th century, where the conditions are very much different from today. The characters presented are very unique. In addition, there are many important lessons that we can get from this book, but the book still uses a classic translation, so the translation is a bit difficult to understand. Okay. That's all from our group. Thanks for
Thanks for
watching,
watching,
and
and sorry
sorry
when
when
we
we
have
have our
mistake.
mistake. Goodbye.